A wealthy woman accustomed to privilege and power discovers her husband's affair with someone she looks down on, her domestic worker. But when her fury collides with her prejudice, she unravels not just her marriage, taking drastic actions that destroy the family's fortune, including her own. What begins as an act of justice quickly spirals into a whirlwind of revenge and self-destruction, leaving everyone involved grappling with the consequences. Don't forget to like and comment where you are from. A life of privilege. Samantha Ellison stood at the window of her sprawling mansion, the city skyline reflecting off the glass. She had everything: wealth, status, and influence, thanks in part to her husband, Charles Ellison, a prominent judge known for his stern demeanor in court and charm outside of it. Samantha believed their life was picture perfect, an example of what hard work and social connections could achieve. The morning began as it always did. The sound of crystal glasses clinking echoed from the dining room, where Samantha sipped her freshly brewed coffee, served precisely at 8 a.m. by her longtime domestic worker, Elena. Samantha barely acknowledged Elena's presence. Her eyes instead focused on her tablet as she scrolled through the latest social news. "Samantha, the charity gala on Thursday, don't forget, we need to finalize the guest list," Charles said, walking in with his usual air of authority. Samantha nodded absent-mindedly. "Yes, Charles, I've already taken care of it. Just make sure you're there on time. It's important for appearances." Their interactions had become formal over the years, more transactional than affectionate. Charles, always busy with his high-profile cases, often worked late into the night. Samantha, in turn, poured her energy into maintaining their social image. But beneath the veneer of their flawless life, cracks had begun to show. That afternoon, Samantha decided to organize her jewelry collection, a task she often found therapeutic, especially after tense mornings like this one. As she arranged the delicate pieces in their velvet-lined boxes, she paused, frowning. A gold bracelet, a gift from Charles on their 10th anniversary, was missing. She searched frantically, her frustration mounting. "Elena," she called sharply. Elena appeared almost instantly, her hands still damp from washing dishes. "Yes, Mom? Have you been in my room recently?" Samantha's voice was accusatory. "No, Ma'am," Elena replied calmly, though her brows furrowed slightly. "I haven't touched anything." Samantha waved her off, muttering under her breath about carelessness and incompetence. It wasn't the first time she had suspected Elena of overstepping her boundaries, but she had no proof. Shaking her head, she resolved to look again later. Later that evening, Samantha busied herself preparing for an elite dinner party. Charles had promised to join her, but as usual he sent a last-minute message saying he'd be stuck at work. "Always work," Samantha muttered, her irritation barely concealed. The dinner was uneventful, a blur of polite smiles and shallow conversations. When Samantha returned home, the mansion was eerily quiet. She went to their bedroom expecting to see Charles fast asleep, but his side of the bed was empty. She shrugged it off, assuming he was working late again, and went to bed. But as the days passed, subtle signs began to emerge, things that didn't quite add up. Charles's late nights became more frequent. A faint floral scent lingered on his suits, one that didn't match her perfume. And then there were the hushed phone calls he would take in his study. Samantha's suspicions grew, but she dismissed them, not wanting to believe her carefully curated life was anything less than perfect. Instead, she buried herself in her usual routines, attending high-profile charity events, shopping at exclusive boutiques, and hosting elaborate dinner parties. She was determined to maintain the illusion that her life was flawless, even as a subtle unease began to gnaw at her. One evening, as she finalized plans for an upcoming gala, she noticed Charles had forgotten his cufflinks on the dining room table. A small detail, but one that stuck with her. It wasn't like him to be careless. She shrugged it off and returned them to his study, where she was greeted by a faint but unfamiliar floral scent lingering in the air. It was too delicate to be hers, too distinct to ignore. Samantha hesitated, her eyes scanning the room. Everything seemed in order, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was out of place. She opened the drawer where Charles kept important documents, only to find a new leather-bound notebook. The initials E.G. were embossed on the cover, initials that didn't belong to anyone in their family. Her hand hovered over the notebook before she quickly closed the drawer. "I'm being ridiculous," she muttered to herself, forcing a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. Over the next few days, she tried to convince herself that she was imagining things. Charles's late nights at the courthouse, the occasional missed calls, and even his distracted demeanor were all, she reasoned, the result of his demanding career. Yet, the unease persisted. The cracks begin to show. Samantha's unease continued to grow, her thoughts repeatedly circling back to the initials EG embossed on the leather notebook. Days turned into weeks, and though she tried to maintain her usual composure, her instincts told her something was amiss. Charles, ever the composed and charming figure, seemed oblivious to her suspicions. His late nights became routine, and when he was home he seemed distracted, often retreating to his study with vague excuses about pending court cases. Samantha, ever vigilant, began noticing more inconsistencies, a subtle change in his cologne, a sudden uptick in his energy, as if fueled by something or someone new. One morning, Samantha decided to shake the growing unease by hosting an exclusive garden brunch for her closest socialite friends. She curated every detail meticulously, from the hand-selected floral arrangements to the custom-made invitations embossed with her signature crest. The Ellison name demanded nothing less than perfection. As the guests sipped their mimosas and exchanged gossip, Samantha kept up her facade of poise and charm, even as her mind wandered. It wasn't until one of her friends, Lauren, leaned in with a knowing smirk that the cracks in her mask began to show. "Darling," Lauren began in a hushed tone, her perfectly manicured hand resting lightly on Samantha's arm. "You've heard the whispers, haven't you?" Samantha's stomach tightened, though her expression remained calm. "Whispers about what, Lauren?" she asked, her tone light but edged with curiosity. Lauren took a sip of her drink, savoring the moment. "About Charles. They say he's been spending an awful lot of time at that new art gallery downtown. You know, the one that caters to a different crowd." Samantha's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she recovered. "Charles appreciates art. It's no secret. He enjoys supporting local talent." Lauren's smirk widened. "Of course, dear. But the gallery's curator, well, let's just say she's been the subject of her own whispers lately." Before Samantha could respond, another guest chimed in, shifting the conversation to safer territory. But the seed had been planted. As the brunch concluded and the guests left, Samantha retreated to her room, her mind racing. That evening, she decided to investigate further. While Charles was out, she revisited his study, this time determined to uncover the truth. She opened the drawer where she had found the notebook, her heart pounding as she retrieved it. Samantha hesitated before flipping it open, half expecting to find court notes or perhaps even personal musings. Instead, she found handwritten entries, brief, cryptic messages accompanied by dates. Her eyes scanned the pages until she saw a phrase that stopped her cold. "Dinner with E tonight. A moment of peace." Her pulse quickened as she turned the pages. More notes followed, detailing what could only be described as intimate encounters. References to stolen moments, shared laughter, and subtle descriptions of someone who wasn't her. The notebook slipped from her hands, landing on the desk with a dull thud. Samantha's breath came in shallow gasps as the weight of the betrayal sank in. Her perfect life, the carefully constructed world she had fought so hard to maintain, was crumbling before her eyes. But the betrayal didn't end there. As she paced the room, her eyes landed on Charles's briefcase, carelessly left open on the floor. Poking out from a folder was a receipt. Samantha crouched to pick it up, her hands trembling. It was from a high-end boutique, a store she frequented herself. The purchase, a gold bracelet engraved with the initials EG. The realization hit her like a freight train. Not only had Charles betrayed her, but he had also done so with someone he had allowed into their home, someone she had dismissed as invisible, unworthy of her attention. Elena. The name burned in her mind like a brand. Samantha felt a surge of emotions, anger, humiliation, and an overwhelming sense of betrayal. But beneath it all, a simmering resolve began to take hold. This wasn't just about infidelity. This was about power, respect, control, and Samantha Ellison would not be made a fool of in her own home. As the grandfather clock in the hall chimed midnight, Samantha sat in the darkness of the study, her mind spinning with plans. She had always been a woman who thrived on control, and now, more than ever, she needed to reclaim it, whatever it took. The confrontation. The next morning, Samantha awoke with a storm brewing inside her. She replayed every interaction she'd ever had with Eleanor. The quiet humility, the way Eleanor always averted her gaze, the almost imperceptible kindness in her actions. It all grated on Samantha now. She had always prided herself on keeping her household proper, and the idea of someone she considered beneath her threatening her carefully curated life was intolerable. Eleanor had worked in the Ellison household for nearly a decade, maintaining an impeccable reputation. Her presence was always subdued, her demeanor calm, and her work flawless. But now all Samantha could see was betrayal. It wasn't just that Charles had been unfaithful, it was with someone like her, someone Samantha viewed as inferior, both in station and, though she would never admit it aloud, race. Samantha found herself staring at her reflection in the mirror, her jaw tight. She must have planned this, she muttered under her breath. Positioned herself perfectly. She's not as innocent as she looks. The day passed in a tense haze. Samantha pretended to carry on as usual, but every time she saw Elena, the bitterness churned within her. Eleanor's every movement seemed calculated now, the way she arranged flowers on the dining table, the faint smile she gave when asked to serve tea. To Samantha, it was all an act. By evening, Samantha could no longer contain herself. "Eleanor," she called sharply from the grand foyer, her voice echoing through the expansive space. Eleanor appeared moments later, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her expression neutral. "Yes, ma'am?" Samantha stepped forward, her eyes narrowing as she folded her arms. "How long have you been working for us?" Eleanor blinked, taken aback by the abrupt question. "Almost 10 years, ma'am." "And in those 10 years, have you ever felt entitled to more than what I've generously provided?" Elena's brow furrowed slightly, confusion flickering across her face. "I'm not sure what you mean, ma'am." Samantha's tone grew sharper. "Don't play coy with me. I've always treated you fairly, better than fairly. Yet here you are, undermining everything I've built." Eleanor took a small step back, her hands tightening around the towel. "Ma'am, I don't understand." "Don't lie to me," Samantha snapped, her voice cutting through the air like a whip. "I know, about you and Charles." The words hung in the air, heavy and accusatory. Eleanor's eyes widened, and for a brief moment her mask of calm slipped, replaced by shock. "Ma'am, I assure you, Don't you dare deny it." Samantha's voice trembled, a mix of rage and humiliation. "I see how you've wormed your way into his life, into my life, acting so innocent while scheming behind my back." Eleanor's expression hardened, her shoulders straightening. "With all due respect, ma'am, I don't think it's appropriate to accuse me of something like this." Samantha let out a bitter laugh, circling Elena like a predator. "Appropriate? You think anything about this is appropriate? A woman like you?" Her voice dropped, dripping with disdain. "Thinking you could ever belong in a world like ours? Do you honestly believe Charles cares about you, that you're anything more than a fleeting distraction?" Eleanor flinched, but she held her ground. "Ma'am, I do my job to the best of my ability. Whatever problems you're having with Mr. Ellison are between you and him." Samantha's hand shot out, pointing toward Eleanor accusingly. "Don't you dare try to shift the blame. You're nothing but a leech, clinging to what doesn't belong to you. You've taken advantage of my generosity, my kindness, and for what? To destroy my family?" Elena's jaw tightened, her voice steady despite the storm in her eyes. "I've done nothing to harm your family, ma'am, and I won't stand here and be insulted for things I didn't do." Samantha's face twisted with fury. "You think you can talk back to me in my house? You're lucky I don't throw you out this instant." Elena's gaze didn't waver. For the first time, Samantha saw something in her that she hadn't before. Strength. It enraged her even more. "You don't belong here," Samantha hissed. "Not in my home, not in my world. You've overstepped, and I won't tolerate it." Before Elena could respond, the sound of the front door opening interrupted them. Both women turned to see Charles walking in, briefcase in hand, his face weary from a long day. "What's going on here?" he asked, his tone calm but firm as he set his briefcase down. Samantha turned to him, her expression a mix of anger and desperation. "Charles, tell her she has no place here." Charles's eyes flicked between the two women, his jaw tightening. "Samantha, calm down. What's this about?" "It's about her," Samantha spat, pointing at Elena. "She's been deceiving us, deceiving me." Eleanor opened her mouth to defend herself, but Charles raised a hand, silencing her. "Samantha, enough. Let's not do this here." Samantha's laugh was cold and hollow. "Oh, we're doing this here, Charles. You think I don't know? About your little affair? How you've humiliated me with her?" Charles's face darkened, but he didn't respond immediately. The silence was deafening, and in that moment, Samantha saw the truth in his hesitation. Her heart shattered, but her fury burned brighter. "You disgust me," she said, her voice trembling. "Both of you." Eleanor's composure finally broke. "Ma'am, I've done nothing wrong." "Save your lies," Samantha snapped. "You're just like the rest of them, thinking you can take what isn't yours. But let me tell you something. I will not let you destroy my family." Charles stepped forward, his tone stern. "Samantha, stop this. Right now." Samantha glared at him, her voice icy. "How you don't get to tell me what to do, not anymore." She turned on her heel and stormed out of the room, leaving Charles and Elena standing in tense silence. Upstairs, Samantha locked herself in her bedroom, her mind spinning. The confrontation had left her shaken, but it had also solidified one thing in her mind. She would not rest until she regained control. And if that meant burning everything to the ground, so be it. The spiral begins. The confrontation marked a turning point in Samantha's carefully constructed life. The walls of control and privilege she had built around herself were crumbling, and the reality she refused to acknowledge now consumed her every thought. As she sat in her lavish bedroom, staring at the opulent furnishings that once brought her comfort, her rage simmered beneath the surface, waiting for release. Samantha's thoughts spiraled. Her husband's betrayal was one thing, an unforgivable wound, but the fact that his affair was with Elena, a black woman, amplified her fury. It wasn't just about the infidelity, it was about the perceived humiliation. To Samantha, this wasn't merely a betrayal of their marriage. It was an attack on her status, her image, and her superiority. Her mind raced with plans to regain control. She would destroy Charles, Elena, and anyone who dared to tarnish her name. Samantha reached for her phone and dialed the private investigator she had discreetly hired days earlier when her suspicions first took root. "Mrs. Ellison," the investigator's gravelly voice answered. "What can I do for you?" "I need everything," Samantha said, her voice cold and unwavering. "Follow Charles, watch Eleanor. I want proof, something undeniable, pictures, documents, anything I can use." "Yes, ma'am. I'll get on it right away," the investigator replied. Samantha hung up, her hands trembling. She had always prided herself on being composed, but the emotions surging within her, anger, humiliation, and even a touch of fear, were too overwhelming to contain. Meanwhile, downstairs, Eleanor sat at the edge of her modest quarters, her hands clasped tightly together. Her heart pounded as she replayed the confrontation with Samantha. The accusations had cut deep, not just because they were false, but because they revealed how little Samantha thought of her after years of service. Elena wasn't naive. She had endured Samantha's condescension for years, swallowing the microaggressions and dismissive remarks in silence. But this, being accused of something so vile, so against her character, was almost too much to bear. She had always believed in maintaining her dignity, even in the face of prejudice, but now she wondered if her silence had allowed Samantha's contempt to fester unchecked. For the first time, Eleanor considered leaving the Ellison household. But where would she go? This job was her lifeline, the stability that allowed her to support her daughter and aging parents. Her resolve hardened. "I won't let her break me," she whispered to herself. Charles paced in his study, his thoughts a chaotic tangle. He had spent years cultivating his image as a respected judge and devoted husband, but his affair with Elena threatened to destroy it all. He hadn't intended for it to happen. Elena's quiet strength and genuine kindness had been a stark contrast to Samantha's icy demeanor. But now he was caught in a storm of his own making. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid reflecting the dim light of his desk lamp. Samantha's accusations had been brutal, but they weren't entirely untrue. He had crossed a line, one he couldn't uncross, and now he was faced with the fallout. Charles knew Samantha wouldn't let this go. She thrived on control, and her fury would know no bounds. He also feared for Elena. Samantha's wrath was dangerous, and if she turned her full attention toward Elena, there would be no telling how far she would go. He downed the whiskey in one gulp, the burn doing little to soothe his turmoil. For the first time in his life, Charles Ellison felt powerless. The next day, Samantha decided it was time to take matters into her own hands. Her investigator had sent her a batch of photographs. Charles meeting Elena at a discreet cafe, the two of them sitting close, their expressions intimate. It was enough to confirm her suspicions and fuel her vengeance. Instead of confronting Charles privately, Samantha plotted her revenge where it would hurt the most, his reputation. She made a call to an influential friend who ran one of the city's most prominent gossip columns. "I have a story you'll want to hear," Samantha said, her voice dripping with venom, "but it has to remain anonymous." Within hours, whispers of Charles Ellison's affair began to spread across elite circles. The scandalous details of the prominent judge's indiscretion with his domestic worker became the talk of every gala, luncheon, and cocktail party. Samantha ensured that no names were explicitly mentioned, but the implications were clear enough for anyone familiar with their household. The plan worked perfectly. By the end of the day, Charles's office was flooded with calls from colleagues, reporters, and even a few concerned friends. His carefully curated image was unraveling. That evening, Charles stormed into the mansion, his face flushed with anger. "Samantha!" he bellowed, his voice echoing through the grand halls. Samantha descended the staircase slowly, her expression calm yet triumphant. "Yes, dear." "What the hell have you done?" Charles demanded, holding up his phone, the screen displaying one of the gossip articles. "This will ruin me," Samantha smirked. "Oh, ruin you? I thought you were already doing a fine job of that yourself." Charles stepped closer, his tone low and threatening. "You have no idea what you've started." Samantha's eyes gleamed with malice. "Oh, but I do, Charles, and trust me, this is just the beginning." From the shadows, Elena watched the exchange, her chest tightening. She had done nothing wrong, yet she was caught in the crossfire of Samantha's vendetta. As the argument between Charles and Samantha escalated, Elena knew she couldn't stay silent any longer. But before she could speak, Samantha turned sharply, her gaze landing on Elena. "And you," she sneered. "Don't think for a second you'll walk away from this unscathed." The words hung in the air like a threat, and Elena felt a chill run down her spine. Escalation. Elena retreated to her quarters, her heart racing. Samantha's parting words echoed in her mind, sharp and menacing. She felt trapped, like prey in a predator's den. She knew Samantha's wrath was not just about Charles's affair, it was about power. Samantha had spent years exerting control over her household, her status, and her image. Eleanor's mere presence, now tangled in the web of scandal, threatened that control. But Elena wasn't one to cower. She had endured enough in her life to know that silence could be dangerous. As much as she feared Samantha, she resolved to protect herself and her livelihood. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in years, her cousin Marisol, a paralegal with connections in the city. "Marisol," Elena said, her voice steady despite her nerves, "I need your help. It's about my job and the family I work for." Upstairs, Samantha was a whirlwind of rage and determination. She had always prided herself on controlling the narrative, but Charles's betrayal felt like a personal failure. Worse still, it involved Eleanor, a woman Samantha had always dismissed as insignificant. That someone she saw as beneath her could disrupt her life in such a monumental way only added fuel to her fury. Samantha sat at her vanity, scrolling through her phone. The scandal was spreading faster than she anticipated. Social media was ablaze with speculation, and anonymous posts hinted at the affair between Charles and Elena. The attention thrilled and disgusted her in equal measure. "Let them talk," Samantha muttered, her reflection cold and calculating. "Let them see him for what he is." But the satisfaction was fleeting. The backlash wasn't solely aimed at Charles. Whispers of Samantha's racism and classism had begun to surface, with anonymous accounts sharing stories of her belittling behavior towards staff and colleagues. One post in particular caught her attention. "The Ellison scandal isn't just about an affair. It's about how power is abused in the home and the workplace. The real question is, what else has Samantha Ellison been hiding?" Her grip on the phone tightened. The narrative was slipping out of her hands, and she couldn't allow that. In his study, Charles sat slumped in his chair, his hands covering his face. The phone on his desk buzzed incessantly with messages from colleagues and reporters. The scandal had reached his professional life, with whispers that his credibility as a judge was now in question. How could a man tasked with upholding the law be so reckless in his personal life? "Damn it," he muttered, pouring another glass of whiskey. His thoughts turned to Elena. He cared for her deeply, but he couldn't deny the recklessness of their relationship. It had been a reprieve from his cold marriage, a connection he hadn't felt in years. But now, that connection threatened to destroy everything he had built. Charles picked up his phone and dialed Elena. The call went to voicemail. He left a message, his voice heavy with regret. "Elena, it's me. Please, we need to talk. I'll protect you from Samantha, I promise. Just call me back." The next morning, Elena met with Marisol in a quiet cafe downtown. She explained everything: Samantha's accusations, the affair, and the growing tension in the household. Marisol listened intently, her pen gliding across her notepad as she took detailed notes. "Elena, you need to be careful," Marisol said. "If this escalates, Samantha could try to ruin your reputation or worse. But you have rights. You don't have to let her intimidate you." Elena nodded, her resolve strengthening. "I've done nothing wrong. I won't let her destroy me." Marisol leaned forward. "Good. Here's what we'll do. Document everything, every conversation, every threat. If Samantha crosses a line, we'll be ready." Back at the Ellison mansion, Samantha's fury boiled over. She stormed into Elena's quarters, her presence looming like a thundercloud. "Elena," Samantha snapped, "I want you out of this house. Today." Elena stood her ground, her hands clenched at her sides. "I have done nothing wrong, Mrs. Ellison. You can't fire me without cause." "Cause?" Samantha sneered. "You've destroyed my marriage. You've humiliated this family." "I didn't destroy anything," Elena said, her voice steady but firm. "You and Charles did that all on your own." Samantha's face turned a deep shade of red. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You think you can talk to me like that? After everything I've given you? You're nothing without this job." Eleanor met her gaze, unflinching. "Maybe it's time you realize that people like me aren't disposable. You don't own me, Mrs. Ellison." The words hung in the air, a defiance Samantha had never faced before. Her hands trembled with rage, but she turned on her heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Samantha retreated to her bedroom, pacing like a caged animal. Elena's words replayed in her mind, each one stoking her anger further. She picked up her phone and called the private investigator. "I want dirt on her," Samantha hissed. "Anything, I don't care how small, find me something I can use." "Yes, ma'am," the investigator replied. As the call ended, Samantha stared out the window at the sprawling estate. She had spent years building her life into a fortress of power and privilege. Now that fortress was under siege, and she would stop at nothing to protect it, even if it meant destroying everyone in her path. Samantha's descent. The investigator moved quickly. Within 24 hours, Samantha received a file packed with information about Elena. The details were sparse but enough to exploit. Elena's immigration history, financial struggles, and ties to a local activist group were outlined. Samantha scanned the pages with a grim satisfaction, her mind racing with ways to use the information to discredit Eleanor. She picked up her phone and dialed her lawyer, a man known for his ruthless tactics. "I need you to draft a termination notice for Elena Morales," she said curtly. "Make it airtight, and prepare a non-disclosure agreement. She's not leaving this house with the power to speak." Her lawyer hesitated. "Samantha, if she has evidence or claims of mistreatment, this could backfire. Are you sure about this?" "I'm not paying you to question me," Samantha snapped. "Do it." Eleanor was not caught off guard. With Marisol's guidance, she had anticipated Samantha's retaliation. When Samantha's lawyer delivered the termination notice and NDA, Eleanor refused to sign. "You think you can silence me?" Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the knot of fear in her stomach. "I know my rights, Mrs. Ellison. You can fire me, but you can't take my dignity." Samantha smirked, leaning against the doorframe. "Dignity? Is that what you call sleeping with my husband?" Elena's expression hardened. "Your husband came to me. He sought out what you couldn't give him: kindness, respect, love." The words hit Samantha like a slap. Her smirk vanished, replaced by a cold fury. "Get out of my house," she hissed. "I will," Elena said, picking up her bag, "but don't think this is over." Meanwhile, Charles's world was crumbling. News of his affair had reached the Judiciary Board, and he was called in for an emergency hearing. The media frenzy surrounding the Ellison scandal was relentless, and reporters camped outside the courthouse, shouting questions as he arrived. Inside, Charles faced his peers, stern-faced judges who once respected him, but now looked at him with disdain. The board chair wasted no time. "Judge Ellison," he began, "your conduct has called into question your ability to uphold the integrity of this institution. Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Charles cleared his throat, his voice cracking as he spoke. "I made a mistake, a personal failing that I deeply regret, but my professional record remains untarnished. I ask for the opportunity to prove that this incident does not define me." The room remained silent for a moment before the chair replied, "This matter requires further investigation. Until then, you are suspended from your duties." Charles nodded, his shoulders slumping as he left the chamber. The suspension was temporary, but the damage to his reputation felt permanent. Samantha wasted no time in leveraging the information she had on Elena. She contacted a tabloid reporter, feeding them a carefully curated narrative. Elena as a manipulative seductress who preyed on her family for personal gain. The article was published the next morning, complete with photos of Elena entering and leaving the Ellison mansion, and the headline screamed, "Domestic worker seduces judge, wrecks prominent family's fortune." The article painted Samantha as a victim, a loyal wife betrayed by both her husband and her employee. It was exactly the narrative Samantha wanted, but Eleanor wasn't defenseless. Marisol acted quickly, reaching out to an investigative journalist known for exposing corruption and abuses of power. Together, they prepared a counter-narrative, one that highlighted Samantha's racist treatment of staff, Charles's ethical breaches, and the broader systemic issues of power dynamics in wealthy households. When the article was published, it painted a very different picture. Behind the mansion walls, the truth about the Ellison scandal. The story went viral, with quotes from former employees who corroborated Elena's claims of Samantha's abusive behavior. Social media exploded with support for Elena, turning her into an unexpected symbol of resilience against systemic oppression. As the public discourse shifted, the Ellison household descended further into chaos. Charles, now jobless and disgraced, spent his days drinking in his study, avoiding Samantha and the growing storm outside. Samantha, consumed by rage and desperation, refused to back down, even as her social circle began to distance themselves. One evening, their arguments reached a boiling point. "You've destroyed us," Samantha screamed, throwing a glass at the wall. "I destroyed us?" Charles shot back. "You're the one who's weaponized this against everyone. You couldn't stand losing control, so you burned it all to the ground." Their shouting match echoed through the mansion, a bitter symphony of blame and regret. Amid the chaos, Elena found solace in her growing network of supporters. Activists rallied behind her, using her story to shed light on broader issues of workplace discrimination and abuse. She was offered a position with a non-profit organization advocating for domestic workers' rights. Elena accepted the offer, determined to turn her ordeal into a force for change. She left the Ellison mansion for good, her head held high, knowing she had won the battle that truly mattered. The Ellisons, once the epitome of privilege and power, were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. Samantha, isolated and financially strained, was forced to confront the consequences of her actions. Charles, stripped of his career and respect, retreated from the public eye. The scandal served as a stark reminder that power, when abused, inevitably collapses. And for Elena, it was a testament to the strength of standing up against injustice, no matter how insurmountable the odds. Revenge and redemption. The Ellison scandal showed no signs of dying down. Samantha, once revered for her philanthropic endeavors and high society presence, became the subject of public ridicule. Headlines branded her as a vindictive socialite whose racism and greed destroyed her own family. In the weeks following Elena's departure, Samantha's mansion became her prison. Invitations to galas and charity events dried up, her once loyal friends turning their backs. Financial losses mounted as endorsements for Charles's speaking engagements were pulled, and Samantha's accounts, frozen during a pending legal investigation, left her scrambling to maintain appearances. One evening, she sat alone in the grand dining room, the silence deafening. The emptiness was a stark contrast to the glittering gatherings she once hosted. A framed photo of her and Charles on their wedding day stood on a nearby table. She stared at it, bitterness swelling inside her. "It wasn't supposed to be this way," she whispered to herself. Her anger, however, was not just directed at Charles or Elena. Deep down, Samantha began to feel the sting of self-awareness. Every decision she'd made to preserve her image, every step she took to maintain her power, had only isolated her further. Meanwhile, Charles's downward spiral continued. He stayed secluded in his study, surrounded by empty whiskey bottles and unopened letters from the Judiciary Board. The suspension turned into a full investigation, and Charles now faced potential disbarment. One afternoon, Samantha stormed into the study, her composure cracking. "You're just going to sit here and drink while everything falls apart?" Charles looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "What do you want me to do, Samantha? The world has already judged me." "I want you to fix this," she shouted. "Do something, anything." Charles slammed his glass onto the desk, the sound echoing through the room. "Fix it. This mess isn't just mine, Samantha. You've destroyed our reputation just as much as I have." Their argument escalated, each blaming the other for the destruction of their lives. But in the midst of their shouting, a realization dawned on Charles. "We can't undo the damage," he said, his voice suddenly calm, "but we can stop it from getting worse." While the Ellisons imploded, Elena flourished. Her story became a rallying cry for activists, sparking conversations about racial injustice, worker exploitation, and the abuse of power in wealthy households. She was invited to speak at conferences and events, her quiet strength inspiring those who had faced similar struggles. One evening, Elena stood before a packed auditorium, her voice steady as she recounted her experience. "I thought being silent would protect me," she said, "but silence only empowers those who harm us. Speaking up isn't easy, but it's necessary." The audience erupted into applause, and Elena felt a sense of purpose she hadn't known before. Her fight was no longer about personal vindication. It was about creating change for others. Back at the Ellison mansion, Samantha devised a plan. Determined to regain control, she contacted the tabloid journalist she'd previously worked with. "I have more details about Elena Morales," she said, her voice cold. "Let's finish what we started." The journalist hesitated. "Your last story backfired, Samantha. People aren't buying your narrative." "Then make them believe it," she demanded. "Dig deeper. Find something. Anything." But Samantha's desperation only made her more reckless. The journalist, sensing her vulnerability, instead began leaking private details about Samantha's involvement in discrediting Eleanor, further tarnishing her reputation. One afternoon, Samantha received an unexpected visitor. Eleanor stood at the gate of the mansion, calm but resolute. Samantha, though stunned, allowed her inside, curious about the purpose of the visit. "You have some nerve showing up here," Samantha said, her tone sharp. "I didn't come for you," Elena replied. "I came to remind you of something." Samantha crossed her arms, waiting. "You tried to destroy me," Elena continued. "But I survived because I refused to become like you. This isn't about revenge, Samantha. It's about justice. And justice doesn't need to be cruel." The words struck a chord Samantha didn't want to acknowledge. "Is that all?" she asked, feigning indifference. "No," Elena said, stepping closer. "I also came to tell you this. You're the only one who can decide if this is where your story ends. You've already lost so much, don't lose yourself." Elena left without another word, leaving Samantha to grapple with the weight of her choices. Elena's words lingered in Samantha's mind. For the first time, she began to question the path she had taken. Alone in the quiet mansion, she revisited the memories of her actions, every harsh word, every manipulative move. The shame was suffocating. She picked up the phone and called Charles. "We need to talk," she said. "What is there left to say?" he replied, his voice weary. Samantha hesitated, then said, "I want to make things right. For both of us." As Samantha and Charles sat together in the study, they discussed the possibility of rebuilding. Not their wealth or status, but their integrity. They decided to issue a public apology, acknowledging their mistakes and pledging to support initiatives for workers' rights and racial equity. It was a small step, but it marked a shift in their priorities. Whether it was enough to salvage their lives remained to be seen. While the Ellisons attempted to navigate their downfall, Elena moved forward with her head held high. Her advocacy work gained national attention, and she became a symbol of resilience and justice. She no longer lived in the shadows of the wealthy, but stood as an equal, fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves. As she walked past the mansion one last time, she felt no bitterness, only hope for a future where power would be wielded with compassion, not cruelty. The final reckoning. The fallout from the Ellison scandal sent ripples through the community. The once mighty power couple was no longer untouchable, their reputations in shambles. Yet within the chaos, a sliver of redemption began to take shape. Samantha Ellison, stripped of her wealth and influence, found herself facing the harsh reality of her choices. The once grand mansion had been sold to cover legal fees, leaving her in a modest apartment far removed from her former life. But in the quiet of her new surroundings, Samantha discovered something unexpected: humility. Determined to rebuild, she reached out to organizations she had once dismissed. Samantha volunteered at shelters and joined workshops on racial equity, where she listened to stories that mirrored Elena's struggles. Each story was a mirror reflecting the pain she had ignored for so long. At first, her efforts were met with skepticism. "What's a socialite doing here?" one woman asked. But over time, Samantha's consistency and willingness to learn softened the edges of the room's judgment. For the first time, Samantha wasn't trying to maintain appearances. She was trying to change. Charles Ellison, now disbarred and estranged from most of his former peers, found solace in teaching. He joined a community college as a legal ethics instructor, using his own mistakes as cautionary tales for aspiring lawyers. Though the position was far from the prestige he once enjoyed, it gave him a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. One evening, during a lecture on accountability, Charles paused, looking at the eager faces of his students. "Justice isn't just about the law," he said. "It's about integrity. And integrity isn't what you show the world, it's what you carry when no one's watching." Elena Morales, now a prominent activist, continued to inspire others with her resilience. She launched a foundation dedicated to empowering domestic workers, providing legal resources, educational programs, and support networks. The foundation, named Rise Together, became a beacon of hope for those seeking dignity and justice in their workplaces. One day, as she prepared for a keynote speech, a letter arrived from Samantha. The handwriting was careful, almost timid. Inside, Samantha apologized, not with grandiose language, but with simple honesty. "I can't undo the harm I caused," Samantha wrote, "but I'm trying to do better. Thank you for showing me that strength isn't about power. It's about doing what's right, even when it's hard." Eleanor folded the letter and smiled. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a step. Months later, Elena and Samantha shared a stage at a community event focused on workers' rights. The audience watched as the two women, once adversaries, spoke candidly about their journey. Elena began, her voice steady. "Our stories are different, but they're connected. Change doesn't come from one person, it comes from all of us standing together." Samantha followed, her tone humble. "I'm here because I was wrong, and I'm here because I've learned that redemption isn't a destination, it's a daily choice." The applause that followed was thunderous, not for one woman or the other, but for the power of transformation and unity. As the event concluded, a cameraman approached Elena and Samantha for a brief video message. Elena spoke first. "To everyone watching this, thank you for staying with us on this journey," she said. "This story isn't just ours, it's yours too. Every act of courage, every choice to stand up for what's right, creates ripples of change." Samantha added, "If this story moved you, let it inspire action. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, change begins with a single step." Elena nodded. "So like this video, comment below with your thoughts and tell us where you're watching from. Your voices matter. They're what make this community stronger. And don't forget to subscribe," Samantha said, a faint but genuine smile crossing her face. "Together we can keep shining a light on stories that matter." As the screen faded to black, one final message appeared. "Every ending is a chance for a new beginning. Together, we rise." To everyone who made it to the end of this story, thank you. Your engagement fuels this community. If this story inspired you, don't stop here. Hit the like button, share it with friends and family, and subscribe to join us in creating change. Let us know in the comments, what's one step you'll take to make a difference today?